In an industry where locomotives are constantly reassigned, rebuilt, or scrapped, how did this single switcher stay put for over half a century? Serial number 102-345. Built May 15, 1973. Delivered new to Cedar Hill Yard in Connecticut. And it never left. Most American switchers last 25 to 35 years before they are retired or torn apart for scrap. This one has outlived them all without ever changing addresses. What kept a 53-year-old machine alive comes down to something no one expected. A switcher is the unsung backbone of any rail yard, a locomotive built not for speed or spectacle, but for the slow, heavy work of sorting cars, building trains, and shuttling freight through a maze of tracks. Unlike the mainline engines that thunder across continents, a switcher spends its days crawling at walking pace, coupling and uncoupling cars, nudging heavy loads into place with precision and patience. The job is relentless. Start, stop, reverse, repeat. Every movement is measured, every task essential, but rarely celebrated. The anatomy of a switcher reflects this purpose. At its core sits the prime mover, a diesel engine, usually a V12 or V8, designed for high torque at low speeds. The engine drives a generator, converting mechanical energy into electricity, which then powers a set of traction motors mounted on each axle. These motors give the switcher its distinctive grunt, allowing it to move heavy cuts of cars even on tight curves or slippery rails. The control stand inside the cab is simple and direct: a throttle, a reverser, and a bank of analog gauges. No digital screens, no computerized diagnostics, just levers, dials, and the steady hand of an experienced crew. Other subsystems are built for endurance and easy repair. The electrical cabinet holds relays and fuses that can be swapped in minutes. The air brake system, fed by a piston-driven compressor, controls every stop and start. Underneath, a cast iron frame absorbs decades of shocks from hard couplings and sudden loads. Every component is oversized, overbuilt, and designed for a lifetime of daily punishment. This is not glamorous work. But the switcher's world is one of quiet discipline, inherited skill, and machines built to last. Its story is not about breaking records or drawing crowds. It is about showing up, shift after shift, year after year, and making the yard run. Stamped into a weathered rectangle of cast metal, the locomotive's identity is set as firmly as the steel rails beneath it. The builder's plate, bolted to the frame just behind the front steps, reads Electromotive Division, General Motors, Model SW9, Serial Number 1-02345. Built May 15, 1973. These numbers are more than a formality. They are the locomotive's birth certificate, proof that this machine is not merely similar to the one delivered half a century ago, but the very same engine unchanged in its essential purpose. Paperwork from the day of delivery still exists in the railroad's archives. A typewritten receipt, faded but legible, shows the transfer from the Electromotive Division plant in LaGrange, Illinois, to the Norfolk and Western Railway. The delivery log records the date, May 15, 1973, and the assigned destination, Cedar Hill Yard. Within 24 hours, the unit was entered into the yard's roster as Engine 8945, its new road number painted in block letters on the cab. The roster entry, preserved on microfilm and later digitized, lists the same serial number found on the builder's plate, tying the factory record to the yard's own documentation. No other switcher at Cedar Hill can claim this unbroken chain of evidence. The plate, the serial, the paperwork, and the roster all converge on a single machine, an EMD SG9, delivered new in 1973 and never reassigned. For 53 years, this locomotive has answered to the same yard call, its identity as fixed and enduring as the work it performs. In an industry defined by turnover and change, such continuity is rare. Here, though, the facts leave no room for doubt. This is the same switcher doing the same job in the same place for more than half a century. Cedar Hill Yard sits quietly on 85 acres of industrial land, pressed between the Quinnipiac River and the old brick warehouses of New Haven. Its boundaries have hardly shifted since the 1970s, hemmed in by city streets and the slow sprawl of light industry. 5 parallel classification tracks stretch across the core of the yard, each one long enough to hold a short train but never sprawling like the Great Western humps. Runaround loops and 4 stub-end sidings branch off to serve the industries that cluster at the yard's edge: auto parts warehouses, a petroleum terminal, a handful of metal shops, and food processors. In 1973, the yard's customer list was modest but steady. Automobile plants needed boxcars and flatbeds, the Gulf oil refinery demanded a constant flow of tank cars, and local manufacturers shipped out scrap steel and aggregates by the carload. Unlike the mainline depots built for speed and scale, Cedar Hill was always a yard of measured moves and careful sorting. The flat switching layout, no gravity humps, just direct hands-on work, required a resident engine nimble enough to handle tight curves and light enough to respect the soft ground of the floodplain. The geometry of the tracks, with their narrow turnouts and abrupt clearances, ruled out larger road engines. Instead, a single switcher became the yard's constant companion, shuttling 3 or 4 cars at a time between customer sidings and the main tracks. Over time, the yard's traffic evolved. Petroleum loads waned as the refinery scaled back, while intermodal containers from the port grew more common. Yet the essential pattern endured: short consists, frequent shifts, and the need for a locomotive that could work all day without complaint. The switcher's presence was more than a convenience. It was a necessity, woven into the daily rhythm of the yard's operations. In a place defined by constraint and routine, the machine's reliability became its greatest asset, a silent answer to the question of why, year after year, the same locomotive was called to duty in the same patch of ground. Across the railroad industry, the story of a switcher rarely stretches beyond 3 decades. The standard arc is predictable. A new locomotive arrives, works its way through 25 or 30 years of daily duty, and then is either rebuilt, reassigned, or quietly retired. For most yard engines built in the 1970s, the expected service life hovers between 25 and 35 years, a window shaped by the relentless wear of stop-and-go work, evolving safety standards, and the steady march of technological change. Some units are traded off to smaller short lines, others are stripped for parts, and a handful are preserved in museums, their working days ended by corporate mergers or the arrival of more efficient replacements. Industry surveys from the American Short Line and Regional Railroad Association show that by year 30, the majority of yard switchers have either undergone a major rebuild or left their original assignment. Only a small fraction, less than 5%, remain in continuous service at the same location past the 40-year mark. The logic is institutional. Railroads are under constant pressure to optimize fleets, cut costs, and comply with tightening emissions rules. Locomotives are treated as assets to be rotated, upgraded, or retired as economics dictate. Even the most reliable machines are eventually cycled out, their place taken by newer models with cleaner engines and digital controls. Against this backdrop, a switcher that has worked the same yard for more than 50 years stands as a statistical anomaly. It defies the usual life cycle metrics, outlasting not just its mechanical peers, but also the corporate names stenciled on its cab. The persistence of one engine in one yard year after year is not just unusual, it is nearly unheard of. This endurance raises questions of loyalty and utility, of why, in a world built on turnover and planned obsolescence, a single machine would be allowed to carry on, quietly and without fanfare. far beyond what the industry expects. Ownership of Cedar Hill Yard has changed hands more than once since 1973. But the switcher's story is inseparable from the legal and economic logic that kept it rooted in place. When Penn Central collapsed in 1976 and Conrail took over, the yard's locomotive roster was frozen by a labor agreement negotiated just 1 year earlier. Section 12B of the 1975 Penn Central Collective Bargaining Agreement required that all diesel-electric switchers assigned to a designated yard remain there for the duration of the contract unless both sides agreed to a replacement. This clause was not just a bureaucratic footnote, it became a shield, protecting the switcher from the asset shuffling that usually follows a merger or bankruptcy. The same provision survived into the 1991 Conrail Agreement, word for word, and was cited again in the 1999 transfer from Conrail to CSX. Each time the yard changed corporate parents, the locomotive's name stayed on the yard engine register, a simple list that carried the force of contract. For the railroad, the math was straightforward. Reassigning the switcher would have meant repainting, retraining, and refitting the yard for a new model, costs that easily outstripped the price of simply keeping the old engine on the job. Meanwhile, the yard's unique track geometry and maintenance routines were matched to the SW1200's dimensions, making any swap more trouble than it was worth. Through decades of consolidation, this labor clause acted as a quiet anchor. It turned a single line in a union contract into a bulwark against change, binding the switcher to its home yard as owners, logos, and corporate strategies shifted all around it. The locomotive's survival is as much a story of institutional memory and negotiated continuity as it is of mechanical endurance. In an era when most machines are treated as interchangeable assets, this one became a fixture, protected not by sentiment, but by the fine print of industrial pragmatism. Durability in a switcher is not just luck. It is the result of decisions made at the drafting table and on the factory floor. The heart of this locomotive's longevity lies in its cast iron frame, poured and machined to handle decades of pounding, jarring work, unlike lighter welded frames that fatigue and twist under constant stress. Cast iron shrugs off the punishment of daily couplings and hard stops. Cracks can be drilled and plates bolted on, but the core remains unyielding, a foundation built for the long haul. The electrical system follows the same philosophy. Instead of complex circuitry or proprietary modules, the switcher uses a straightforward direct current setup. Each traction motor is wired through modular relays and fuses, so a failed component can be swapped in minutes with nothing more than a wrench and a spares bin. The result is a machine that does not depend on a single fragile part or a dealer-only computer to keep running. Even as the industry moved toward electronic controls, this locomotive kept its analog soul, making it immune to software glitches and obsolescence. At the center of the engine, a mechanical governor handles fuel flow and engine speed. No sensors, no microchips, just levers, springs, and a rotating flyweight, all adjusted by hand. Mechanics can tune it with a screwdriver, and if it wears out, a replacement can be machined in any competent shop. This simplicity is not an accident. It is a design that invites maintenance, not replacement, a machine that survives because it was built for people who fix things, not just operate them. In the world of industrial equipment, this is the difference between a tool that is disposable and one that becomes part of the landscape, decade after decade. Inside the Cedar Hill shop, the rhythm of the day is set not by a clock, but by the steady hands of the crew who keep the switcher alive. 3 roles define the ritual: the lead mechanic, the apprentice, and the oiler. Each brings a different history and a different set of instincts, but all share a respect for the routines that have kept the engine running since 1973. The lead mechanic starts every shift with a walk-around, listening for changes in the idle, feeling for heat on the axle bearings, and checking the oil for the faintest trace of metal. The apprentice, usually the youngest, learns by doing, draining the air tanks, cleaning the injector rack, and scrubbing carbon from the exhaust manifold. It's hands-on work, solvent, rags, and a wire brush, passed down from the last generation to the next. The oiler knows every grease fitting and every trick for coaxing another season from a tired traction motor. Some jobs, like cleaning the injector rack, are more than maintenance. They are a kind of ritual, a way of showing respect to a machine that returns the favor with another day's honest labor. In this shop, knowledge is not written down. It is spoken, shown, and repeated until it becomes second nature. The crew's pride is not loud, but it is visible in the way they treat the locomotive, not as a relic, but as a partner that has earned its place day after day, year after year. Paint tells its own story in the life of a locomotive. On delivery day in May 1973, the switcher arrived in a crisp orange and black scheme. The Norfolk and Western's colors bright against the dull backdrop of Cedar Hill Yard. Black dominated the long hood and cab, while a bold orange stripe swept along the sides, carrying the proud NW initials in block letters. For more than a decade, that livery stood as a daily reminder of the railroad that ordered the engine new, a visual anchor in a world of constant movement. Change first arrived in the early 1980s, when a mid-career repaint covered the orange with Conrail blue. The NW letters gave way to a white stencil, and the engine number shifted to match the new owner's roster. Later, as CSX took control in 1999, another layer of paint settled on the old metal, deep blue and yellow, the CSX logo replacing all that came before. Each coat was applied with the same utilitarian brush, more about covering the last era than celebrating the new one. Decals peeled, numbers shifted, but beneath the changing skins, the cast iron frame and familiar outline never wavered. A photo timeline spanning 5 decades reveals as much about the railroad industry as it does about the locomotive itself. Logos come and go. Color palettes shift with each merger, and yet the engine's silhouette remains unchanged. Through every era, the same switcher works the same yard, its identity layered but never erased. The paint may fade, but the machine endures, a living record of corporate churn and quiet continuity. Every decision to keep the old switcher at Cedar Hill has come down to numbers, not nostalgia. The price of a used switcher from the 1970s hovers between $150,000 and $250,000, sometimes less, if you are willing to do the repairs yourself. A brand new Tier 4 compliant yard engine with its digital controls and emissions hardware starts at $1.2 to $1.5 million before you even factor in training or specialized tools. The difference is stark, especially for a yard where profit margins are measured in pennies per ton. Routine maintenance for the old engine runs about $18,000 to $30,000 a year, depending on the hours worked and the price of parts. That covers everything from oil changes to traction motor brushes, with most jobs handled by the in-house crew. Compare that to the annualized cost of a new locomotive, including finance charges, warranty, and software updates, and the math keeps pointing in the same direction. Beyond the spreadsheets, there is another advantage: availability. When a modern switcher breaks down, it can sit for days waiting on proprietary parts or a factory technician. The old SW9, by contrast, returns to service quickly, thanks to a stockroom of spares and mechanics who know every bolt by heart. The savings are not just theoretical, they are visible in the yard's daily rhythm, where uptime is not a luxury, but a necessity. In the end, sentiment has little to do with it. The logic is practical, even ruthless. Keep what works, spend only what you must, and let the machine prove its worth with every shift. Modern switchers arrive with a level of technical complexity that would have seemed outlandish in 1973. Federal emission standards now require every new yard engine to be equipped with systems such as selective catalytic reduction, called SCR, and diesel particulate filters, called DPFS. SCR injects a fine mist of urea into the exhaust stream, breaking down nitrogen oxides into harmless nitrogen and water. The DPF traps soot and ash, burning it off in high-temperature regeneration cycles controlled by onboard computers. Layers of sensors, electronic control modules, and diagnostic software monitor every pulse of the engine. Where the old switcher can be kept running with a wrench and a voltmeter, a Tier 4 locomotive demands factory-trained technicians and a steady supply of proprietary parts. The leap is not just about cleaner air. It is a wholesale shift toward machines that are as much digital as mechanical. For a yard accustomed to fixing what it owns, the difference is more than cost. It is a question of whether replacement is even practical. The old switcher's greatest enemy isn't rust or fatigue. It's the slow disappearance of the spares that keep it alive. Most of the components it relies on left the factory floor decades ago. The original manufacturer stopped producing traction motor field coils and governor assemblies years back. Now, when something fails, the shop crew scours aftermarket catalogs, calls third-party rebuilders, or cannibalizes retired engines for whatever can be salvaged. Prices rise with each passing year. A rebuilt traction motor can run over $12,000, and a single fuel pump, if you can find one, might cost nearly $3,000. The shop supervisor keeps a running list of parts on borrowed time, watching as the supply of spares shrinks and lead times stretch to months. A full retrofit to meet modern emission standards would cost more than the engine is worth. Each repair becomes a wager. One more season, maybe two, against a future where the next breakdown might be the last. 53 years of service have turned a simple switcher into something more than a machine. Its cast iron frame and analog controls are not just relics. They are living artifacts, holding the fingerprints of every mechanic who ever coaxed another year from tired bearings or hand-tuned the governor. Each layer of paint, each patch welded onto the hood, tells a silent story of adaptation and survival. In a world where most equipment is cycled out, forgotten, or replaced the moment it becomes inconvenient, this locomotive stands as a stubborn exception. It carries the memory of vanished companies, old work rules, and the rhythm of a yard that has outlasted the industries it once served. The engine's continued presence is a kind of industrial memory, a reminder that durability and practical design can outlast not only the people who built and maintained it, but also the very logic of the systems that once demanded its replacement. In that endurance, the switcher becomes more than useful. It becomes meaningful, a quiet testament to the value of making things that last. In a world chasing efficiency and upgrades, this unassuming switcher endures, outlasting mergers, new regulations, and generations of hands. Its steady presence is a living memory of when machines were built to serve, not to be replaced. As modern fleets grow more disposable, its survival asks what we lose when durability is no longer valued. Sometimes, the quietest engines leave the deepest mark. Share your thoughts about this era below.